Winter is coming. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is The Advocate, and today I'm an advocate for the top 10 storylines heading into the winds of winter. So a few years ago, I read the first 5 books in George R. R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire series and immediately fell in love with the series. So much so that instead of picking up on a new book series, I instead decided to reread the entire A Song of Ice and Fire series in hopes that by the time I finished, George would finally announce his long-anticipated mythical 6th book in the series, The Winds of Winter. Oh, you sweet summer child. Well, needless to say, Winds is yet to become a reality. But my reread of the series did help deepen my appreciation for George R. R. Martin's character writing and world building. It also made me aware that, holy snap, these books are jam-packed full of intricate plot threads and lore. No wonder George is taking a ridiculously long time to write The Winds of Winter. So why not take a closer look at these plot threads by organizing them in a top 10 list of the storylines I'm personally most excited to follow up on in The Winds of Winter. Like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy. Now just a heads up, the organization of this list will be primarily based on my own subjective opinion. If you don't agree with this list, or I don't talk about a specific storyline you personally are most excited to look forward to, that's totally okay. We all have our own opinions, and you are entitled to yours just as I am to mine. Truth be told, this was a bit of a challenging list to sort through, as by the end of A Dance with Dragons, I counted 20 storylines that we have heading into the Winds of Winter. However, regardless of whichever storyline you're looking forward to, the next book is pretty much guaranteed to bring answers and chaos to that particular arc. Also know that throughout this video, I will occasionally be referencing material from the Winds of Winter sample chapters provided by George R. R. Martin. Although these are a good indicator for predicting the future trajectory for many of these plotlines, these sample chapters should not be taken as gospel. Much of the material in these chapters has yet to be officially canonized, and as George has stated in his blog posts, they are subject to rewrites. Oh, and it should go without saying, but... So let's hop to it, ladies and gentlemen. Here are my top 10 storylines heading into the Winds of Winter. Number 10. Daenerys in the Dothraki Sea. So for someone who proclaims herself to be Queen of the Andals, Daenerys Targaryen sure does seem to demonstrate a clear lack of willingness to claim her birthright as Queen of Westeros. In A Dance with Dragons, she appears to be more interested in ruling over Meereen than King's Landing. However, right before the end of that book, Dany's tune changes when, after experiencing multiple hallucinations involving Quaithe, her deceased brother Viserys, and her former companion Jorah Mormont, she realizes that her true goal is to indeed rule Westeros. However, before the Mother of Dragons can ride off on Drogon towards that queenly destined sunset, Dany is spotted by a Khalasar led by none other than her former co, Mr. Khal Jaqo. Now, Dany hasn't seen Jaqo since way back in the first book of Game of Thrones, so some time has passed since their last encounter. However, these two didn't exactly part ways peacefully, as back then Jaqo, having witnessed the fall of Khal Drogo, proclaimed himself Khal, stole 20,000 Dothraki riders from Daenerys' Khalasar, and sexually assaulted and murdered Erwe, a Lazarene girl who was under Dany's protection. This information had rankled Dany, and after hearing about what had happened, she proceeded to swear vengeance on Jaqo. "It was a cruel fate," Dany said, "yet not so cruel as Magos will be. I promise you that. By the old gods and the new, by the lamb god and the horse god and every god that lives. I swear it by the mother of mountains and the womb of the world, before I am done with them, Mago and Code Jaqo will plead for the mercy they showed Erwe. I am Daenerys Stormborn, Daenerys of House Targaryen, of the blood of Aegon the Conqueror and Maegor the Cruel and old Valyria before them. I am the dragon's daughter, and I swear to you, these men will die screaming." Now, I really like this quote for a multitude of reasons. In the long term, this quote hints at a potential madness inside of Daenerys as she gets a little carried away here with her "I am the blood of Aegon the Conqueror" spiel. If Mad Queen Daenerys truly is George R. R. Martin's endgame, then the seeds are definitely present here for that madness to eventually bloom and bear fruit down the line. However, the other reason I really like this quote is because in the short term, Dany definitely has it out for Jaqo. Despite their unintended reunion here at the end of A Dance with Dragons, I'm sure Dany hasn't forgotten of everything Jocko did way back in Book 1. If she wanted to, I'm sure she could easily burn a fiery death onto Jocko via her growing teenage Drogon. After all, this would not be too out of character for her given how harsh she has been in the past to those who harm the weak and innocent. But Jocko is a shrewd man. Given that his Khalasar was observed fleeing from Drogon prior to Dany's landfall, I'm sure he knows what he's up against here. Jocko would probably think twice before making Dany mad once more. So here's where the question marks begin for what could happen next. Would Jocko, knowing full well of the dragon he's up against, choose to bend the knee to Daenerys in order to save his life and the life of his Khalasar? Would he offer up his Khalasar to Dany as retribution for what he did back in A Game of Thrones? A Khalasar that I'm sure Dany would be very grateful to have given she's currently lost and in dire straits. Or would Dany rebuke Jocko here and immediately kill him and steal his Khalasar like he did to her back in A Game of Thrones? Whether or not Dany and Jocko team up though, there's also the question of what will happen after this moment. Will Dany, now being part of a Khalasar, choose to march to Vice Dothrak, the Dothraki capital, and assemble the different Khalasars there in order to assist her in a renewed goal of taking back the Iron Throne? There are multiple possibilities here, and although I'm not going to attempt to guess on what I think will happen, I am curious to see what decisions Dany will come to as she hopefully sets things up for her travels back to King's Landing. This is why Daenerys' trek in the Dothraki Sea holds the number 10 spot in the storylines I'm most excited to read through in The Winds of Winter. Number 9. The Resurrection of Jon Snow. Jon fell to his knees. He found the dagger's hilt and wrenched it free. In the cold night air, the wound was smoking. "Ghost," he whispered. Pain washed over him. "Stick them with the pointy end." When the third dagger took him between the shoulder blades, he gave a grunt and fell face first into the snow. He never felt the fourth knife, only the cold. Now, I actually have a story on this one. On Monday, June 15, 2015, I come into work, and the first thing someone tells me that morning is, "Jon Snow is dead!" Although I had not read the A Song of Ice and Fire series at that point, there were a ton of people who were watching the TV show, so it was impossible to be removed from the cultural zeitgeist that was Game of Thrones. Jon Snow's death in the season 5 finale of the TV show was all any of my classmates, coworkers, and friends could talk about that day. Additionally, I vividly recall one of my friends who had read the books prior to watching the TV show, laughing to himself in the corner that day while everyone else was crying about Jon Snow. He said something to the effect of, "Hey, I can tell not everybody here has read the books." And it is unfortunately that friend's comment that alerted me to the fact that, oh, Jon Snow's not really dead, is he? And thus, one of the biggest spoilers in this series was ruined for me. Thanks, friend. Now, I shouldn't be too upset with my friend, because even if I did not have prior knowledge of Jon Snow's impending resurrection, there's no way I would have bought into the notion that Jon was actually going to stay dead. There's way too many clues within A Dance with Dragons that point to a second life here for Jon. Mance should have let me take the dire wolf. There would be a second life worthy of a king. True death came suddenly. He felt a shock of cold, as if he had been plunged into the icy waters of a frozen lake. Then he found himself rushing over moonlit snows with his packmates close behind him. Half the world was dark. One eye, he knew. Varamir's Sixskins describes his physical death as cold prior to waking in the body of his wolf, One Eye. Jon also feels that same cold sensation prior to collapsing in the snow. Additionally, Jon utters the word ghost just before dying, cluing us into the fact that in that moment, Jon was probably warging into ghost, as he had unintentionally done many times in the past. Furthermore, Melisandre has a POV chapter in A Dance with Dragons where she's at the wall, and besides developing her character through a conversation with Jon, there's really no other reason for her to be there other than to potentially have her use her fiery magic at some point in the future to transfer Jon Snow's soul from Ghost back into Jon's body. Moreover, although the TV show should be treated as its own separate canon from that of the book, Jon was resurrected in the TV show, and this was back when Game of Thrones writers were still loosely adapting from George's notes. Therefore, Jon coming back to life at this point is pretty much a certainty in the Winds of Winter. However, the reason this storyline is on this list is because I am very curious to see what happens in the immediate aftermath following Jon's demise. Things were pretty chaotic back at Castle Black when Jon was stabbed to death by his brothers-in-arms. Will the wildlings, in a fit of rage, seek to kill the key instigators behind Jon's death? What about when Jon does finally come back to life? Will Jon choose to punish those instigators for their betrayal? Also, will Jon exhibit any change in behavior or personality following his resurrection? What's more, prior to his death, Jon received an infamous pink letter from an alleged Ramsay Bolton who claimed to have killed Stannis Baratheon and Mance Rayder. Now, we're not here to dissect who could have sent that letter, as the fandom has already come up with a multitude of potential culprits for this letter. But regardless of the sender, this letter spurred Jon into making an impassioned speech to the wildlings, psyching them up in order to take the fight to Ramsay Bolton and rescue Arya, who they believe to be at Winterfell. Following his resurrection, will Jon follow through with this desire and head to Winterfell to take the fight to Ramsay Bolton like he did in the budget-busting Battle of the Bastards episode of the Game of Thrones TV show? I don't really know, but I'd be curious to see if George follows suit with what happened in the TV show. There's a few possibilities here, and almost all of them have some level of intrigue. This is why the resurrection of Jon Snow holds the 9th spot in the stories I'm most excited to read about in the Winds of Winter. Number 8. Cersei and King's Landing. Kaboom! I think the first thing people think of when they imagine future storyline possibilities for Cersei Lannister is the wild sept explosion that occurs in the appropriately named The Winds of Winter Season 6 finale of the TV show. And although I personally wasn't too big of a fan of the story events following this explosion, there's no denying that this was a very memorable moment to close the season on. There's even textual evidence within the books to support Cersei's fondness for wildfire, so having her use the substance in some way to eliminate her enemies isn't too wild of a theory. No pun intended. Cersei felt too alive for sleep. The wildfire was cleansing her, burning away all her rage and fear, filling her with resolve. The flames are so pretty. I want to watch them for a while. Now, although Cersei's propensity for spectacle would not be too out of line for her character, if a wildfire explosion were to occur in the next book, I personally could not see it playing out the same way as it did in the TV show. Now, don't get me wrong, Cersei does hate Margaery Tyrell, what with her trying to put Margaery to death and accuse her of treason, and she is mistrustful of the Tyrell family, but the aftermath of this spectacular wildfire explosion definitely requires a few leaps in logic. For one, given that this explosion killed so many key figures, I cannot fathom a story where Cersei experiences such minimal consequences. This is a series about how every action has consequences. Cersei orchestrating this clear act of terrorism should see more prolonged turmoil and outrage from the public than what was seen on TV. And two, after the explosion, Cersei's ascension to the Iron Throne is relatively uncontested. Given the destruction of a significant religious institution and the loss of key noble families, the lack of any kind of resistance or rebellion against her rule seems unrealistic. But I'm pretty much screaming at a wall here because I already know George's versions of events are pretty much guaranteed to be different than those in the TV show. More likely than not, our dear young Griff, a character who was excluded from the TV show and someone we will talk about more later on in this video, is making his way towards King's Landing with an army. Regardless of whether there is a sept explosion or not, I'm sure young Griff will probably have a few things to say to Miss Cersei Lannister about her rule. Additionally, we also have the death of Tommen's new hand in Kevan Lannister, who is killed in the epilogue of A Dance with Dragons by a crossbow from Varys, and a couple of nasty stabbings from some of these little birdies that Varys likes to keep around. Will Cersei truly find a way to blame the Tyrells, or maybe even the Dornish, for Kevan's death, as Varys suspects might happen? And even after all this has come to pass, what about Cersei's recurring nightmare regarding Maggie the Frog's prophecy? And when your tears have drowned you, the Valonqar shall wrap his hands about your pale white throat and choke the life from you. Will Maggie's prophecy about Cersei's Valonqar, the High Valyrian word for little brother, come to be Cersei's undoing in the next book? Particularly since Cersei seems to be so paranoid that this Valonqar is Tyrion, when it could very easily well be her other younger brother and Jaime Lannister, who has gone through quite a redemption arc of his own. Will Jaime put a sword through Cersei's heart like he did to Mad King Aerys way back when? I'm not sure, but that would be hella poetic. Regardless, what is certain is that we are guaranteed some nice action in Cersei's story no matter how things shake out. The multitude of intriguing possibilities in Cersei's King's Landing storyline is why I have this plot thread as the number 8 story I'm most excited to read through in the Winds of Winter. Number 7. The Battle of Fire. Now, one thing I didn't really delve into detail about in my review of A Dance with Dragons is something called the Myronese knot. It's an infamous term used by George R. R. Martin to refer to the difficulty he had in writing the A Dance with Dragons Essos plotlines. And in an attempt to unravel this knot, George plays around with different times of arrival for half a dozen different characters as they all attempt to reach Daenerys in Meereen by the end of the book. George's untangling struggle is the main reason why A Dance with Dragons was delayed from its originally scheduled 2006 release date all the way to 2011. It was a confluence of many factors. Let's start with the offer from Shadow to give Dany ships, the refusal of which then leads to Karth's declaration of war. Then there's the marriage of Daenerys to pacify the city. Then there's the arrival of the Yunkish army at the gates of Meereen. There's the order of arrival of various people going her way: Tyrion, Quentyn, Victarion, Aegon, Marwyn, etc. And then there's Daario, this dangerous sellsword, and the question of whether Dany really wants him or not. There's the plague, there's Drogon's return to Meereen. All of these things were balls I had thrown up into the air, and they're all linked and chronologically entwined. Now, although George was mostly able to solve the Myronese knot with the introduction of the Barristan Selmy point of view character, we still don't have every single one of our key characters that is supposed to be in Meereen. The significance of having every character here is to spark the brewing battle between the Yunkish slavers and the Myronese defenses in a battle that has been dubbed by the fandom as the Battle of Fire. George was originally going to include the Battle of Fire within the pages of A Dance with Dragons. However, given that George decided to spend more time writing about the intricacies of slaver governments, sellsword company hierarchies, and Quentyn, George ran out of page space in A Dance with Dragons and had to inevitably push the battle back into the Winds of Winter. Now, pushing the battle back is not the worst thing in the world, as it pretty much guarantees that the beginning of the Winds of Winter is going to start off with an explosive bang. A bang that includes multiple parties at work here. First, we have Barristan Selmy. Holed up behind the crumbling walls of Meereen, the last we see of Barristan is in the Winds of Winter sample chapters where Yunkish slaver captains are catapulting deceased corpses onto the walls of Meereen, and Barristan and his forces of newly made knights are pretty much Meereen's last line of defense. The opposing battalion of sellsword companies and Yunkish men-at-arms are trying to break through the city's gates, and all of this is going on while the chaotic neutral wildcards that are Dany's dragons are flying around the city and pretty much burning whoever catches their eye. On the opposite side, we have Tyrion Lannister. Having sold his life and Casterly Rock to a life of servitude to Brown Ben Plum's second sons, Tyrion finds himself in a battle he wants no part of on a side he does not wish to belong to. Meanwhile, Victarion Greyjoy, accompanied by his naval fleet of 61 ships, is within sailing distance of Meereen. The slaver ships cutting off Meereen from incoming food supply on the Skahazadon will likely be easy pickings for Victarion as he quests to make Daenerys his wife and seal her away from under his brother Euron Crowseye Greyjoy. Now, although I do have a difficult time believing that Victarion will accomplish his ultimate goal of marrying Daenerys, I do think Victarion will be the catalyst for helping turn the tide of battle and finally having the Myronese defenses defeat the Yunkish slavers and thus save Meereen. However, where things become less certain are with regards to Victarion's shipmates and their alleged loyalty to Victarion. Up until now, the Iron Captain has been pretty loud about his disdain for Euron and his desire to take Daenerys as his queen. He's had many conversations with a salt wife who has been dubbed the Dusky Woman, and it is highly theorized that Euron, who has the ability to warg into other beings, is listening in on Victarion's quote-unquote private conversations through this Dusky Woman. Even more intriguing is the mysterious Red Priest in Mokorro. Up until now, Mokorro has aptly assisted Victarion, has read him some favorable forecasts which have allowed Victarion to acquire new ships, and has even given Victarion a really cool volcano arm. That's honestly the coolest superpower in this book, in my opinion. However, it's obvious that Mokorro has ulterior motives and is only using Victarion to reach Marine. Once they reach the mainland, will Mokorro betray Victarion? What about Euron's Dragonbinder gift to Victarion? How will that play out in Winds? We also can't forget about Marwyn the Mage. At the end of A Feast for Crows, Marwyn is aware of Daenerys' presence and her growing dragons, and immediately rushes off in a ship in order to meet Dany. Will he reach Marine before or after the Battle of Fire takes place? As you can see, I have a ton of questions here, as there's a plethora of storylines all coalescing within Marine. Small wonder why George struggled with the Mirian he's not, and why he's likely struggling with Winds right now. Although I think it's obvious that the good guys are going to win this upcoming battle, a lot of interesting wrinkles are guaranteed to take place throughout this story once the battle ends. There's a lot going on here, and the layered intricacies of this upcoming battle are why the Battle of Fire is my number 7 most anticipated storyline I'm most excited to read through in The Winds of Winter. Number 6. Davos and Rickon. My son Wendell came to the twins a guest. He ate Lord Walder's bread and salt and hung his sword upon the wall to feast with friends. And they murdered him. Murdered, I say, and may the phrase choke upon their fables. The North remembers, Lord Davos. The North remembers, and the Mummers farce is almost done. Roose Bolton lies about his part in the Red Wedding, and his bastard lies about the fall of Winterfell, and yet so long as they held wireless, I had no choice but to eat all this excrement and praise the taste. I can deliver King Stannis the allegiance of all the lands east of the White Knife, from Widow's Watch and Ramsgate to the Sheep's Head Hills and the headwaters of the Broken Branch. All this I pledge to do if you will meet my price. Roose Bolton has Lord Eddard's daughter. To thwart him, White Harbor must have Ned's son, and the direwolf. The wolf will prove the boy is who we say he is, should the Dreadfort attempt to deny him. That is my price, Lord Davos. Smuggle me back my liege lord, and I will take Stannis Baratheon as my king. Boy oh boy, if there's any storyline in the series that has started off with a bang, it's definitely this one. I get chills reading Wyman Manderly's speech to Davos. His wonderful monologue proves that although many northern families appear to be allied with the Freys and Boltons, it is merely a facade. The North's love for the Starks runs deep. 8,000 years deep. They'll never forget that love. And what better way to show that love than by backing the youngest male member of the Stark family in order to one-up the Boltons' own scheme to claim Winterfell via their Arya pretender in Jane Poole. Manderly's request for Davos to hoist anchor towards Skagos, an infamously dangerous part of the world known for its cannibalism and unicorns, and retrieve a still-alive Rickon Stark has a level of intrigue attached to it. For one, we've never been to Skagos, and seeing what exactly takes place in this allegedly dangerous part of the world has a mystery aura to it. And two, seeing what Rickon has been up to on this island definitely piques my interest. Out of all 5 Stark children, we've spent the least amount of time with Rickon, so I'd be curious to get a deeper insight into his character in the upcoming book and seeing how he potentially may have grown since last we saw him in A Clash of Kings. Based on the feral nature of his direwolf, Shaggy Dog, Rickon has the temperament of an angry child. Although Davos may fear for the boy's safety on this savage island, something tells me that the young Stark's vicious temperament, in combination with the accompaniment of Shaggy Dog and Osha, his wildling protector, will have endeared him to the Skagosi people. So much so that the people of Skagos may even worship Rickon as their king. This, of course, assuming that the Skagosi are the vicious people that the rest of Westeros claim them to be. However, the number one reason that I am most looking forward to this storyline is due to the implications that come from the rest of Westeros discovering that Rickon is indeed still alive. The sudden appearance of Rickon alongside Shaggy Dog will have explosive consequences for the politics in the North and will definitely weaken the Boltons' claim over Winterfell. But it may not even go that way, because if we know anything about Osha or the Wildlings, it's that the Free Folk are less concerned about the petty power squabbles between the Westerosi elite and are more concerned about the true threat that lies north of the Wall, the others. If Davos safely escorts Rickon out of Skagos, will they, instead of bringing Rickon back to White Harbor or setting off towards Winterfell, instead sail towards the wall to meet up with the Night's Watch and help fight against the others? Will they encounter Melisandre or the resurrected Jon? And will from there word soon spread to the rest of the mainland that a Stark boy is still alive, thus throwing the North into the eventual political turmoil? I don't know, but I'm excited to find out. Number 5. Elaine Stone at the Vale. If there's one thing I absolutely love in storytelling, it's character development. Jaime's A Storm of Swords story and Theon's A Dance with Dragons story are two of my favorite plot threads in the entire series, purely based on their character development. There's something satisfying about seeing a character change their heart and mindset over the course of the story, as it gives the reader a sense of accomplishment for having invested so much time in that particular character. Similarly, although it's not super blatant quite yet, Sansa is on her own character transformation journey as well. Little by little over the course of the series, Sansa has changed from the innocent little girl lost in song to cynical teenager who has learned the ugly truth about how Westeros really works. Now, Sansa's not a full-blown player in the Game of Thrones quite yet, as by the end of A Feast for Crows she's still relying on Littlefinger for a lot of things, but you can definitely tell that her character is in transition, and she's not the pawn she once was. She's growing more into her role as Elaine Stone, bastard daughter of Peter Baelish, and is having a much easier time lying to the Lords Declarant of the Vale about it. It also helps that she's under the tutelage of the best liar in all the kingdom, Littlefinger himself. She's even starting to come up with some clever ideas of her own, and it's so cool to read about. They're young, eager, hungry for adventure and renown. Lysa will not let them go to war. This is the next best thing. A chance to serve their lord and prove their prowess. They will come, even Henry the heir. Yet smoothed her hair and kissed her forehead. What a clever daughter you are. It was clever. The tourney, the prizes, the winged knights, it had all been her own notion, and no sooner did she tell Peter her idea than he went out and made it happen. Now, it's clear to me that the intended destination for Sansa's story is the student who surpasses the master. And although I'm super excited to see the end result of Sansa's character arc as she finally becomes a player in the Game of Thrones and finally turns on Littlefinger, for the time being, I'm just excited to be along for the ride. Especially right now when, for the moment, both Sansa and Littlefinger seem to be doing very well in their feigned father-daughter relationship. Sansa is happy to be of use to someone and not have to fear for her life. And Peter is happy to have power over the Catelyn Tully he's always wanted. A Catelyn who looks up to him, listens to him, and could even give him Winterfell, a castle I'm sure he'd be very happy to lord over the deceased Brandon and Ned Stark. Jon Arryn's bannermen will never love me, nor silly shaking Robert, but they will love their young falcon. And when they come together for his wedding, and you come out with your long auburn hair, clad in a maiden's cloak of white and grey, with a direwolf emblazoned on the back, why, every knight in the Vale will pledge his sword to win you back your birthright. So those are your gifts from me, my sweet Sansa. Harry, the Eyrie, and Winterfell. That's worth another kiss now, don't you think? Now, the interesting thing here is that despite being a master of keeping secrets close to his chest, Littlefinger sure does seem to be doing a lot of blabbing. Peter's obsession with Catelyn via Sansa by proxy seems to be his Achilles heel, as he increasingly lets his guard down and shares all of his secrets with the eye of his desire. He sees the young Stark girl more as a pawn for his desires both politically and sexually, and less as a potential threat down the line. And this oversight on his behalf may very well lead to his downfall, especially once a more wizened and knowledgeable Sansa pieces together that Littlefinger isn't the wholesome man he pretends to be and may have been the one responsible for betraying Ned Stark back in A Game of Thrones. For now though, I'm just excited to see Elaine's continuing growth and the potential possibility of a payoff for her character arc in The Winds of Winter. Number 4. Jaime and Brienne with Lady Stoneheart. She wants her son alive, or the men who killed him dead. She wants to feed the crows like they did at the Red Wedding. Freys and Bolton's eye. We'll give her those, as many as she likes. All she asks from you is Jaime Lannister. Take the sword and slay the Kingslayer, or be hanged for a betrayer. The sword or the noose, she says. Choose, she says. Choose. Man, the further down we go on this list, the more it becomes obvious why George is having a very difficult time writing Winds. There's a multitude of potential routes here within this particular plot thread, and all of them seem like they could have significant repercussions for the future of this story. When we last left off with Brienne of Tarth, she had been captured by the Brotherhood Without Banners and was tasked by their leader, a zombified resurrected Catelyn Stark, who is now known as Lady Stoneheart, to retrieve Jaime Lannister and bring him back to their camp. If Brienne refuses, the Brotherhood Without Banners will hang Hyle Hunt and a young Podrick Payne. You see, Lady Stoneheart is no longer the loving Catelyn she once was. She's now a cold woman fueled by revenge, and after the events of the Red Wedding, she wants all culpable parties behind that dreaded event killed. At the Red Wedding, Roose Bolton's final words to Catelyn's son Robb Stark before stabbing him in the heart were, "Jaime Lannister sends his regards." This leads Catelyn to believe that Jaime Lannister was a key conspirator behind the event, and she now holds a grudge against him. However, we as the reader are aware that Jaime had nothing to do with the Red Wedding, and unbeknownst to Catelyn, Jaime has even grown as a person since last they met. Jaime has evolved from the impulsive and arrogant knight into a wiser, more mature man who only uses his former personality as a facade. Nonetheless, despite Brienne's attempts to reason with Lady Stoneheart, her pleas fall on deaf ears, and Brienne is then left with no choice other than to deceive Jaime Lannister and bring him back to the Brotherhood Without Banners' camp in order to save the hostages. Now, when looking at the short-term futures of our Riverlands POVs, things look pretty bleak for both Jaime and Brienne. The popular theory amongst readers is that Jaime will be put to trial for his perceived role in the Red Wedding, and Lady Stoneheart will not want to listen to anything on the contrary, despite the fact that there is a clear lack of evidence here. Jaime, caught in this farcical trial, will likely choose to participate in a trial by combat in order to gain his freedom. Lady Stoneheart, being the ice-cold demon she is, will likely choose Brienne of Tarth as the Brotherhood Without Banners stand-in in order to engage Jaime in combat. Both Jaime and Brienne will then be forced to fight, with Brienne wishing to save Hyle and Pod, and Jaime wishing to save his own life. However, in the long term, I have a very difficult time believing that either Jaime or Brienne will meet their end in this battle. Both still have storylines still left to tell, and although George R.R. Martin is known for killing his characters without hesitation, he typically only does this when a character's arc is complete. As I mentioned earlier, Jaime Lannister may in fact be Cersei's Valonqar, and if that is the case, he still has a crucial role to play in the death of his sister. Similarly, Brienne's story is intertwined with Jaime's, as both seek to fulfill their original promises to the former Catelyn to bring her daughters back safely. It's uncertain how they will escape Lady Stoneheart's grasp, or what will happen after their trial if they survive, but there is a plethora of possibilities here for their futures, and the narrative of the Riverlands will be all the richer with both of them still alive. As far as Lady Stoneheart goes, I think the next book is where she officially bites the dust. Permanently this time. However, if she doesn't, her vengeful spree will ultimately lead her to her downfall, thus staying consistent with George's theme about revenge being a self-destructive mission. There's much at stake here for our Riverlands POV characters. While I've been making some educated guesses based on textual evidence, nothing is certain. George R.R. Martin can be unpredictable, so for now, we'll just have to wait and see what awaits Jaime and Brienne in the Winds of Winter. Number 3. Jon Connington and Aegon Targaryen. Oh man, this is a loaded one. The reveal that both Jon Connington and Aegon Targaryen VI are very much still alive is probably the wildest twist of the most recent 2 books in the series. In A Dance with Dragons, Tyrion hitches a ride on a ship that is being captained by a sellsword father-son duo who go by the names of Griff and Young Griff. However, Tyrion soon comes to find out that this father-son duo is not who they say they are, and pretty quickly deduces that the names Griff and Young Griff are nothing more than absurd aliases for the still-alive Jon Connington and Aegon Targaryen. Now, although this is a pretty wild plot twist within the story, my excitement for this plot thread is actually more based on how much of a huge political stir these two could cause with the reveal in Westeros. You see, Tyrion, being in the middle of his "I don't care about anything, F the world" phase, suggests to young Griff / Aegon Targaryen to abandon his fool's quest to meet Daenerys and instead strike west towards Westeros. With Stannis off in the north and Cersei pretty much nosediving the continent into 7 hells, these 7 kingdoms are pretty much ripe for the picking. Not to mention, many people in Westeros are actually quite nostalgic for those peaceful Rhaegar Targaryen days of yore, and those same folk will gather to the cause of a new young Targaryen if he or she were to appear on Westerosi shores. Aegon's arrival not only has the potential to cause a rebellious uprising, but completely disestablish the existing power structure within King's Landing. And sure enough, by the end of A Dance with Dragons and during the events of the Arion Martell The Winds of Winter sample chapters, news of Aegon's arrival begins to make waves around the 7 kingdoms as the common folk excitedly await the arrival of their new king. All looks to be on the rise for the new young dragon as we appear to be headed towards having a new king, new hand, and even new queen in the young Arion Martell. Until it's revealed that Aegon isn't a legitimate Targaryen, but rather a Blackfyre pretender. Potentially. Yes, we're going to address the elephant in the room, ladies and gentlemen. There's a popular theory amongst the fandom that the individual who revealed himself to be Aegon Targaryen VI in A Dance with Dragons is nothing more than a Blackfyre imposter, and the actual son of Rhaegar Targaryen was legitimately killed in Maegor's Holdfast at the conclusion of Robert's rebellion. The Aegon is alive, look and see, is a narrative being sold by Varys and Illyrio in an attempt to sit someone more to their liking on the Iron Throne. Now, I don't believe that Varys and Illyrio truly care about the Targaryens, but they do care about power. And what better way to get a hold of that power than by masquerading someone as a Targaryen in order to take advantage of people's nostalgic love for Rhaegar? This is all just fan speculation, of course, and young Griff may very well be a legitimate true-born Targaryen. However, his authenticity comes into question during a key conversation between Tyrion and young Griff on the Shy Maid. A true friend, our Lord Connington. He must be, to remain so fiercely loyal to the grandson of the king who took his lands and titles and sent him into exile. A pity about that. Elsewise, Prince Rhaegar's friend might have been on hand when my father sacked King's Landing to save Prince Rhaegar's precious little son from getting his royal brains dashed out against a wall. The lad flushed. That was not me! I told you, that was some tanner's son from Pisswater Bend whose mother died birthing him. His father sold him to Lord Varys for a jug of Arbor gold. He had other sons, but had never tasted Arbor gold. Varys gave the Pisswater boy to my lady mother and carried me away. Aye, Tyrion moved his elephants. And when the Pisswater prince was safely dead, the eunuch smuggled you across the narrow sea to his fat friend the cheesemonger, who hid you on a pole boat and found an exile lord willing to call himself your father. It does make for a splendid story, and the singers will make much of your escape, once you take the Iron Throne. Say what you will about George's writing style, but the man doesn't write anything without a purpose. He likes to plant narrative seeds that will one day bear fruit. And oh boy, there's definitely seeds aplenty here for a future fake Targaryen reveal because young Griff sure does seem to be defensive about his Pisswater Prince story. Even if young Griff does legitimately believe himself to be Aegon VI, there are some questionable leaps in logic to his story. Firstly, during Robert's rebellion, Varys would have needed the foresight to know that Lord Tywin would order the execution of Rhaegar and Elya's children. He would then have needed enough time to find a random lowborn baby to swap the young Aegon with before the murder took place. Secondly, why would Elya willingly only give Prince Aegon away? If she knew death was imminent and agreed to the baby swap, wouldn't she try to save the lives of both of her children? Elya's from Dorne, after all, a place where women have equivalent rights to men. Although Dornish politics don't apply to the Iron Throne, in her eyes, Princess Rhaenys is just as important as Aegon VI. And thirdly, why would the Golden Company, an army that originally began as Blackfyre supporters, choose to support Aegon Targaryen? Historically, the Golden Company hates Targaryens. So, mixing some leaps in logic with a little bit of foreshadowing. Soon comes the Pale Mare, and after her the others, Kraken and Darkflame, Lion and Griffin, the Sun's Son and the Mummer's Dragon. Trust none of them. And it's pretty much a certainty that our friend young Griff here is nothing more than a Mummer's Dragon being backed by the Golden Company because he's the great-great-great-grandson of an important Blackfyre from way back when. Now, to play devil's advocate here, there is a bit of evidence to support the idea of young Griff actually being Aegon Targaryen VI. There is an interesting piece of dialogue from Varys way back in A Clash of Kings where he accidentally may have let it slip to Tyrion that one of Rhaegar and Elya's children may still be alive. The prince is a sentimental man, and he still mourns his sister Elia and her sweet babe. The singular use of the word babe implying that only one of Elia's children died on that fateful day. However, this sort of slip-up may be nothing more than happenstance. Varys has rehearsed this "Aegon is alive" story so much in his head that this alleged Freudian slip may just be a consequence of his method acting. That, or maybe he was trying to sell Tyrion on the Aegon is alive story way back then and Tyrion just didn't catch on. Or this could also just be a typo. If you've seen my review of A Dance with Dragons, then you know that George's writing isn't entirely free of mistakes. George may have very well meant to type babes here and just missed the S key on his keyboard. Now I know I've been harping on this is he, isn't he, Aegon plot point for a while now, but it just goes to show you that there's a lot to dig in here with this particular plot thread. Even if half of Westeros rallies behind young Griff and then comes to find out that he's not a true-born Targaryen, the fallout is still guaranteed to be chaotic. Chaotic without even taking into account the horrible plague that's about to hit Westeros. Which brings me to our dear friend Old Griff, aka Jon Connington. Jon has a bit of an expiration date on his hands. Literally. He's got grayscale working up along his hands and up his arms, and Jon has been rather hush-hush about it. Now, I really like Jon Connington, and from a character perspective, I find him to be a more interesting personality than young Griff. The boy has a narrative purpose for sure, but his personality can best be summed up as a short-tempered boy hungry for glory. Jon Conn, on the other hand, has a few more layers to him. His strength of character is twofold. From an in-universe perspective, Jon Conn longs for his former best friend and rumored crush, Rhaegar Targaryen, and he wants to honor his memory by seating the boy he believes to be his son on the Iron Throne. He wants to live long enough to see young Griff achieve the right that was originally Rhaegar's and die a happy man before the grayscale consumes him. From a narrative perspective, Jon Conn functions as a bringer of chaos because the grayscale isn't going to go away anytime soon, and it definitely will have some sort of effect on the Westerosi populace and the story at large. The consequences of Jon not telling anyone about his condition remain to be seen, but as with everything on this list, I'm very excited to read about how it unfolds. In fact, I'm excited to read about all these subplots. Aegon, Varys and Illyrio, Blackfyre's, Dorne's involvement, Jon Connington and his grayscale, the defensive measures of the Lannister regime to all these incoming dangers. There's a lot going on here, and the potential future ramifications are endless. It is for that reason that the Aegon and Jon Connington plot thread holds the number 3 spot on this list. Number 2. Stannis and the Battle of Ice. Here we go, ladies and gentlemen. The second of the 2 big battles that was held off from A Dance with Dragons is set to start the Winds of Winter with a bang. A frozen bang, but a bang nonetheless. So truthfully, my reasoning for having this plot thread as the number 2 storyline I'm most excited to read about is twofold. On the one hand, despite his flaws, Stannis Baratheon is my favorite character in the entire series. My fondness for the character stems from the fact that he's so pragmatic to an almost hilarious degree, and is really the only king to actually try to do something about the others. And 2, the North is dripping with so many fascinating political layers, both inside and outside the walls of Winterfell, that there are so many possibilities for what can happen here in the next book. Now, Stannis is in a very precarious position since last we left him off in A Dance with Dragons. Stannis and his amalgam army of Northern Mountain men, Southern soldiers, and Ironborn captives are en route towards Winterfell in order to rescue Arya, whom they believe to be in Ramsay Bolton's clutches. However, partways into the march, a heavy snowstorm significantly slows down the moving army, and Stannis' forces soon find themselves stranded in the middle of a lonely crofters village located approximately 3 days west of Winterfell. This longer than expected stalling at the crofters village eventually depletes most of the army's food and resources, and now Stannis and his men are left hungry, cold, and shrinking in numbers. Meanwhile, Roose and Ramsay Bolton's grip on Winterfell appears to be loosening as the Mannerleys and Freys come to blows under the roof of the former Stark home. Not to mention Theon Greyjoy, who has overcome his Reek identity crisis, has escaped Winterfell with Jeyne Poole and sought refuge with Stannis. Without Jeyne, who had been forced to pose as Arya Stark, the Boltons do not have a claim on Winterfell through an arranged marriage pact with Ramsay, And in order to maintain that claim over the Northern Lords, Roose must recover the Arya Pretender and eliminate Stannis. As a result, Roose has dispatched separate forces of Freys and Manderleys to deal with the stoic Baratheon. So with the Frey and Manderley contingent about to meet Stannis on the cold battlefield, what can we expect to happen from this upcoming battle in the Winds of Winter?
Bolton has blundered, the king declared. All he had to do was sit inside his castle whilst we starved. Instead, he has sent some portion of his strength forth to give us battle. His knights will be horsed, ours must fight afoot. His men will be well nourished, ours go into battle with empty bellies. It makes no matter, Sir Stupid, Lord Too Fat, the bastard, let them come. We hold the ground, and that I mean to turn to our advantage.
So here's where the theorization fun begins. Although information provided within the Winds of Winter sample chapters should not be taken as gospel, it does serve as a good go-by for what may happen in the future of the story. Despite his apparent disadvantage, Stannis does not seem to be perturbed by the Crofters' village's lack of defenses. The one simple phrase of Stannis holding the ground clues us into the fact that Stannis may have a secret strategy up his sleeve regarding his location adjacent to the Icy Lakes. As Stannis' stranded army has depleted most of their food, many of Stannis' men have resorted to cutting holes in the Icy Lakes in an effort to fish for food. With the amount of times George has repeated this information about holes being cut into the ice, and even instances of men falling through the ice, it's clear that Stannis intends to bait the Frey and Manderley contingent to walk over the frozen lakes and then fall through the breaking thin ice. So based on this information, and the amount of story Stannis still has left to tell, I think it's safe to say that Stannis will come out victorious in the Battle of Ice. Where the question marks begin are what happens after the Battle of Ice. While I've mentioned previously that the content from the TV show should be taken as its own separate canon, it should not be completely ignored. Although Season 5 of the Game of Thrones TV show is a very liberal adaptation of the source material at best, there are a few overlapping events from both the book and the show that are hard to overlook. With events such as Daenerys' flight from Daznak's pit and Cersei's Walk of Shame playing similarly in both the books and the show, many readers have questioned if Stannis will also burn his daughter Shireen in the books as he did in the TV show. In the show, Stannis burned his daughter under Melisandre's instruction as a way to call upon the Lord of Light in order to dissipate the heavy snowstorms that has engulfed the army and help him in order to defeat Roose and Ramsay Bolton. When this dark moment happened in the TV show, many viewers flooded George's inbox with an inquest for answers regarding Stannis' decision to burn his daughter. In the aftermath of that fateful episode, George explained, "The show is the show, the books are the books. Two different tellings of the same story. There have been differences between the novels and the television show since the first episode of Season 1, and for just as long I have been talking about the butterfly effect. Small changes lead to larger changes lead to huge changes. The longer the show goes on, the bigger the butterflies become. And now we have reached the point where the beat of butterfly wings is stirring up storms, like the one presently engulfing my email. For those who may be curious as to the road the books are taking, I direct you to the Winds of Winter sample chapters on my website." Although George provides a rather political non-answer here, it's clear that the books and the TV show had wildly diverged by this point in the series, and even if the show spoiled unreleased material from the books, the way events play out in both sources were guaranteed to be very different. So with all that said, do I think Stannis Baratheon will burn Shireen in the Winds of Winter? My gut says no, but I could be wrong. From what we know about Stannis' character, I don't think it makes much sense for him to burn his daughter, especially because he left specific instruction to Justin Massey to sit Shireen on the Iron Throne should anything happen to him. It also doesn't make sense from a logistical point of view considering that both Melisandre and Shireen are all the way back at the Wall, and Stannis is close to Winterfell. I do think Stannis will burn something in the next book, I just don't believe it'll be his daughter. However, Stannis is going to have to do something soon if he wants to get the upper hand on Roose in a potential battle at Winterfell. Staying idle at the Crofters' village might work in luring the Freys to their frozen death, but he's going to have to do something to move soon afterward as the Boltons have shown that they are satisfied with sitting back behind the walls of Winterfell. There's a lot of questions here for what can happen next. Will Wyman Manderley betray the Boltons as a precursor to Stannis' arrival at Winterfell? Will Ramsay meet Stannis on the battlefield and take Lightbringer as he alleged to do in the mystery pink letter to Jon Snow? What will Theon and Asha's role be in the upcoming battles? We also had Lady Barbary Dustin, who had her own mini-story in A Dance with Dragons. Will she play a significant role in the upcoming battles? Although I've spent a good amount of time theorizing about Stannis in particular, there's a lot to unravel with regards to the situation in the North with a lot of other characters as well. I'm hyped and scared for this storyline and its potential consequences. The answers we seek are held within the Winds of Winter. All we can do now is wait for it to be released. Number 1. Euron Crow's-Eye Greyjoy. Here we have it, ladies and gentlemen. The others notwithstanding, Euron Crow's-Eye Greyjoy is our ultimate endgame villain, our final boss, if you will. Little by little, Euron has received incrementally increasing amounts of page time with each passing book. And if the Winds of Winter sample chapters are anything to go off of, I think Euron's page time will ultimately pay off in a full-on villainous arc for our favorite Crow that we have not seen the likes in any of the previous books. Now, part of my excitement for Euron stems from the fact that up to this point in the series, we haven't really gotten too much of an insight into his character. I mean, sure, we've gotten tidbits here and there from Victarion, Asha, and Aaron Damphair, but aside from that, Euron's character has been shrouded in mystery. However, that all changed when back in 2016, George R. R. Martin released a sample chapter for The Winds of Winter titled The Forsaken, and it has proven to be some of George's best written material yet. A haunting chapter that gives us a frighteningly dark look into this ethereal, almost otherworldly character, and it's quite a ride. Previous to Euron's sudden appearance at the King's Moot and the Feast for Crows, Euron had spent a considerable amount of time in exile, and all we really know about that time is essentially what he's told us. That Euron has allegedly ventured into Asshai, sailed into the Eye of Valyria, somehow acquired a dragon's binder, a dragon's egg, and most chillingly of all, a full-scale armor of Valyrian steel. Euron Crow's-Eye stood upon the deck of silence, clad in a suit of black-scale armor like nothing Euron had ever seen before. Dark as smoke it was, but Euron word as easily as if it was the thinnest silk. Valyrian steel, the Damphair knew. His armor is Valyrian steel! In all the Seven Kingdoms, no man owned a suit of Valyrian steel. Such things had been known 400 years ago in the days before the Doom, but even then they would have cost a kingdom. Euron did not lie. He has been to Valyria. No wonder he was mad. The consistent use of foreboding imagery definitely paints Euron as a terrifying presence within the books. There's an almost supernatural aura to him that distinguishes the Crow's-Eye from other characters, and I'd be very curious to see how this manifests in the next book. If we take into account the Forsaken sample chapter, we get a very disturbing look into the evil Euron character. He has ripped the tongues out of his crewmates, impregnated and silenced his salt wife, murdered his half-brothers while they were babies, and even sexually assaulted his younger brother Aeron when they were just children, before eventually tying him to the prow of his ship as an adult. Moreover, after committing these crimes, he pisses into the sea as a mockery to the drowned god that is held in such high esteem on the Iron Islands, and it just oozes some kind of evil. Now, although Euron being built up as the most evil human to ever walk Planetos does spark an element of interest, the number one reason I'm actually most interested in following up on the Crow's-Eye story is because of one thing, and one thing in particular. Magic. That's right. Magic. George has mentioned previously that the A Song of Ice and Fire series is first and foremost a fantasy and not a historical fiction. Although the definition of what constitutes an epic fantasy is subjective, the consensus amongst many is that in order to qualify as a fantasy, it needs to have some kind of magical component attached to it. While we have seen sprinkles of magic here and there throughout the series, such as Melisandre's shadow binding and the others, George has only lightly touched on the magical side of the fantasy genre in this series up to this point. Fantasy needs magic in it, but I try to control the magic very strictly. You can have too much magic in fantasy very easily, and then it overwhelms everything and you lose all sense of realism. And I try to keep the magic magical, something mysterious and dark and dangerous, and something never completely understood. It should have a sense of peril about it. Although George maintains a level of groundedness within this story, he has incrementally added more and more magic with each passing book. I think this trend will continue in the Winds of Winter, with Euron Greyjoy's storyline being at the forefront of that magic. Euron's full suit of Valyrian steel armor is proof that he wasn't joking about having sailed into Old Valyria. This man is the real deal. And for Euron to have entered into the Eye of Old Valyria and lived to tell about it indicates that Euron must have had some kind of supernatural assistance, such as magic, in order to have aided him in his safe escape. A magic that will give him an edge against the non-magic believing folk of the Citadel in an upcoming battle, and potentially an edge against the folks of King's Landing if sitting himself on the Iron Throne truly is his ultimate goal. Even if Euron's story about having sailed into Old Valyria is nothing more than a fabrication, Euron still holds some serious weapons at his disposal. The Dragonbinder appears to be legitimate, and the Valyrian steel armor speaks for itself. This man is a godless supervillain who believes himself to be a deity. He potentially wields magic and is equal parts mysterious and terrifying. His presence, his fleet, and his weapons are about to seismically alter the events of the Winds of Winter, and I'm here for it. This is why Euron Crow's-Eye Greyjoy is the storyline I am most looking forward to in the Winds of Winter. And there we have it, ladies and gentlemen. Whew, that was a long one. Those are the top 10 storylines I'm most excited to read about in the Winds of Winter. Do you agree or disagree with this list? Definitely drop a comment down below to let me know what your thoughts are on the storylines that you're personally looking forward to the most in the upcoming book. Also, if you're able to, definitely consider giving this video a like and subscribing to my channel. This video took a very, very long time to make, and I really appreciate any support you guys could give me in the form of engagement. I would really appreciate it. Thank you so much, guys. Now, just to be clear with you guys, although I had a lot of fun compiling this list together of storylines I'm most excited to read about in the next book, I do not expect the Winds of Winter to be released anytime soon. I do think Winds will see the light of day someday. It just won't be tomorrow, it won't be this year, and probably won't be next year, so let's just clear the air there. But one day when the book is finally released, I do look forward to finally delving into that book and seeing what part of this list was right and what part of this list was wrong, and just having a lot of fun with the story. Until then, stay tuned for more book videos to come, both from the A Song of Ice and Fire series and other series as well. Take it easy, guys. The Advocate, out.